My name is Virginia Whitmore, 37 years old. The second line on the plastic stick turned pink under the bathroom light, as bright and undeniable as a siren. I stood there listening to the chandelier hum in the hallway, tiny crystals quivering whenever the air vent clicked on. In the mirror, I looked older than 17, older than my fear, older than my excuses. I wrapped the test in toilet paper, stepped into the corridor, and found my father already waiting in his study doorway like he'd sensed a breach in the perimeter. "What is it?" he asked, voice cool as the marble floors. I held up the test. "I'm pregnant." My mother flinched like the word had teeth. "You are lying." Her hand stayed perfectly still as she set her glass down, but the stem trembled. No daughter of mine would be so common. There was a second test, and a third. Silence opened like a pit. My father didn't raise his voice. He never wasted energy that way. He went into my room, took my suitcase from the top shelf, the one they bought for campus visits and smiling futures, placed it by the front door, and flipped the family portrait on the mantel face down with a single, precise motion. The gesture landed like a verdict. "You have 10 minutes, he said, adjusting his class ring. "Take what fits. Leave the key." "Dad, please!" "You are no longer our daughter." His eyes were tired, almost bored, like he was approving a budget cut. My mother stood by the grandfather clock and inspected her manicure. "We'll tell everyone you're studying abroad. This misstep will not embarrass the family." I packed on reflex, jeans, a sweater, my worn ballet flats. I took my grandmother's necklace because they'd forgotten it was mine. I found exactly $227 crumpled in my jewelry box, a number that felt like both a blessing and a joke. When the lock turned behind me, it sounded like a judge's gavel, final and clean. That first night I slept in Riverside Park under the gazebo where the boy who promised me forever had first kissed me. He wasn't there now. His phone had gone quiet the moment I said pregnant, as if the word had shorted out the line or his courage. The second night it rained, and I learned the math of shivering, how it steals sleep in small, exact withdrawals until dawn finds you owing. The third morning, a cashmere coat brushed my cheek. "Child," a woman said, her voice the warm kind people use when speaking to pets and survivors. "You're going to freeze to death out here." I blinked into pale winter light. She was older, hair silvered and elegant, a poodle at the end of a red leash regarding me like a concerned aunt. "I'm fine," I lied. "No," she said, studying my face, then the way my hand rested over my stomach without my permission. "You are not." She sat beside me on the cold bench. The coat smelled like lavender and something earned. I felt the words leave my body in gasps, less confession than collapse. She didn't hurry me. She didn't ask for names. When my breathing steadied, she stood. "Come," she said. "Pierre and I need company for breakfast." Her car was the kind that didn't creak when you closed the door. Heated seats thawed me from the bones outward. We drove west through streets I'd only ever seen as destinations. Boutiques, bakeries, a florist, where the arrangements looked like quiet weddings. The house had ivy and a door the color of old sugar. Inside, everything matched without trying. "I'm Elena," she said, setting her keys in a dish shaped like a leaf. "He's Pierre." The poodle sneezed in acknowledgement. "I can't pay you," I said, because the world had already taught me the price of needing. "We'll settle accounts later," Elena said. "For now, you need a shower, a meal, and a bed." She led me to a room that felt like it had been waiting with its breath held. Soft yellow walls, a quilt that looked hand-stitched, a crib in the corner assembled and unused. In the closet, dresses still had tags. "My daughter was pregnant when she died," Elena said simply, turning the crib mobile with a touch. "Some things feel less like grief if they're given away." The shower smelled like rosemary. My skin went from numb to sting to warmth. I ate scrambled eggs at a table that faced a garden made for spring. When I began to say thank you, she raised a palm. "Eat, then sleep, then we plan." We did not barter in pity. That was the first rule. Elena gave me hours like they were food. She taught me to breathe from the belly, to rest even when rest felt like cheating, to put my hand on my stomach and say, "We will make room for you." She took me to a free clinic that didn't comment on my shoes or my lack of a last name in their system. She made lists with columns: housing, school equivalency, employment. Her handwriting was assertive, the kind that didn't smear. On the third afternoon, she asked to see anything my parents had given me. Documents, letters, receipts. I brought the suitcase. She sifted carefully. An old insurance card, school awards, a picture of me, with braces and bangs I thought were brave. When I told her about the night they cast me out, the portrait turned down, the 10-minute clock, she nodded like she was memorizing the rhythm. Did they sign anything? She asked. I don't know, I said. Lawyers were always around. Maybe. Why? Because signatures outlive apologies, she said, and opened the drawer of her desk. There was a small, portable copier, an old, neat machine, and a fireproof box. She photocopied everything I had and labeled the envelope with my name as if that act were a ceremony. Then she locked it away. Insurance, she said. Paper doesn't forget. Sage was born on a February afternoon that began with sleet and ended with sunlight like a reward. 18 hours of labor taught me what it means to decide and decide again. Elena stood at my shoulder and counted through contractions, a general turned grandmother by force of love. When the nurse offered to cut the cord, I looked to Elena. She took the scissors with steady hands and whispered something in Italian that sounded like blessing. He's brilliant, she declared minutes later, as if it were already a fact. Look at his eyes. I looked and saw only wonder and a need that made me fearless. We brought him home to the room with the yellow walls. The crib fit him like a promise finally kept. Elena arranged small socks in a drawer like they were evidence of hope. When he cried at 2 a.m., she padded down the hall in slippers, her hair undone, and pressed a warm bottle into my hand as if the world could always be this simple. Hunger answered, fear held. The next months tilted between exhaustion and awe. I learned his patterns, the way he'd quiet if I sang off key, how he turned his head toward windows as if light spoke his language. He watched my mouth when I read and tried to shape the sound back at me. The first time he toddled from the couch to my knees, Elena clapped so loudly Pierre barked twice and then, dignified, pretended he hadn't. You two, she said, will not apologize for surviving. When bills came, she stacked them and we faced them together. When doubt arrived, she gave it a chair and we listened until it tired itself out. She owned 3 restaurants. She took me to the smallest first, not to work, but to learn its pulse. Listen, she said as the dinner rush warmed the room. Service is choreography. Dignity is the costume. She taught me inventory like it was a second language, introduced me to vendors who respected her because she paid on time and told the truth. You are not just working here, she told me. You are learning to run an empire. Empires are not inherited, they are maintained. At night, after Sage slept, I studied for my GED at the kitchen table while Elena filled out donation forms and scholarship applications for girls I hadn't met yet. We will make wider tables, she liked to say. Sometimes she would pause mid-sentence, look toward the fireproof box, and then return to her pen. I began to understand that kindness could be both soft and armed. One evening, when Winter was considering surrender, Elena took the photocopies from the box and added a new folder. A copy of a copy, she said. Lawyers love redundancy. I asked what she was protecting us from. She didn't smile. From the day people remember your names, she said. From the day they love what you've built more than they ever loved you. Sage slept with one fist open, as if he was holding space for the future. I lay awake and traced the ceiling cracks like constellations that understood the shape of us. My parents had taught me that love was conditional. Elena taught me it could be a practice. Each morning I found a note by the coffee maker. Buy oranges. Call Mr. DeLuca. You are doing this. And each night I added one of my own. We are still here. When I finally passed the GED, Sage banged a wooden spoon on the table like he was leading applause, and Elena opened a single bottle of champagne and 3 mismatched teacups. To paper, that tells the truth, she said, raising hers. I pressed the certificate flat on the counter like a passport. It didn't erase the exile, but it named me citizen of something I chose. On the day Sage said his first clear word, light, Elena kissed the top of his head and whispered, almost to herself, he'll change more than rooms. I followed her gaze to the fireproof box, to the envelopes with my name in her sure handwriting, and felt the smallest shift in the air, a warning or a promise. That someday, when the world turned to look at us, we would be ready. If love saved us, what happens when success exposes us? I didn't know, but Elena's house had a lock that always clicked twice, and documents that did not blink. And at night, when the chandelier's crystals quivered in the vent's breath, I remembered my father's hand turning the family portrait face down, and understood, with a clarity that made me bold, that portraits can be hung again, just not always in the houses you leave. By the time Sage turned 3, he was already pulling books off shelves heavier than he was, flipping pages with the kind of focus that made adults pause mid-sentence. He read stop signs out loud on car rides, traced letters with stubby fingers, and asked questions I couldn't answer fast enough. Elena called him her professor, but always with a softness that kept him tethered to childhood. He walked at 9 months, spoke in full sentences before most kids left babbling behind, and at 5 he corrected my math homework with the absolute certainty only a child can have. It would have been overwhelming if not for the fact that every small miracle unfolded against the backdrop of Elena's steady presence. She'd watch him set toy soldiers in surgical rows and whisper, "He's building a world," as if foretelling something only she could see. For me, survival had turned into progress. I studied for my community college classes at the same kitchen table where Elena balanced restaurant ledgers. Sometimes she'd slide one across to me and say, "Run the numbers. Tell me where I'm bleeding." It wasn't just a test, it was training. She wanted me to see how profit margins weren't abstract, but the difference between staff with jobs and a shuttered door. One night she took me to Rossi's, her flagship downtown. The dining room pulsed with low jazz, candles flickering against walls painted a shade between cream and confidence. "Service," she whispered as we watched waiters glide between tables, "is choreography. Each step rehearsed, each gesture deliberate." She sent me home with the wine list and told me to memorize the regions before next week. At first I thought it was generosity. Then I realized it was legacy. She wasn't just keeping me afloat. She was building me into something that could stand on its own. Sage grew alongside that empire. He'd sit on the host stand flipping through anatomy books borrowed from the library while I learned to manage double bookings and smooth over entitled diners. At 7, he performed surgery on his teddy bear with a toy stethoscope and actual sutures he'd found on YouTube. Elena watched, one eyebrow raised, and said, "He has hands that will cut and heal. We must give him the chance to choose which." By 10, Sage was accepted into a gifted program. His teachers marveled at his comprehension, but it was his empathy that startled them, how he would pause before answering questions, watching others to see if they wanted the chance first. "Brilliant is easy," Elena told him once. "Kind is rare. Don't forget which matters more." There were evenings when I feared the weight of expectation might crush him. "What if he doesn't want this path?" I asked Elena. "What if he just wants to be ordinary?" She sipped her tea, eyes narrowing with amusement. "Then we will let him. But I suspect," she added, glancing at Sage bent over a book about the human heart, "that ordinary will not let him." It was around then that Lance Mitchell entered our lives. Elena insisted on annual updates to her will, always adding clauses with the precision of someone who had outlived both illusions and naivete. Lance arrived with tidy folders and a smile that disarmed me immediately. He wasn't tall, but he had a presence that suggested sturdiness, like a wall that wouldn't topple even in a storm. I remember the first evening he joined us for coffee after finishing Elena's paperwork. He noticed Sage scribbling drawings of veins and arteries on a napkin. "That's the brachial artery, right?" Lance asked. Sage's eyes lit up as though someone had finally been fluent in his private language. They spoke for 20 minutes straight, and when Sage was finally pulled away to bed, Lance turned to me. "Your son's remarkable, but I think you already know that." Something in his tone wasn't flattery. It was recognition, the kind people use when they've seen a rare thing and won't cheapen it. Later that week, Elena teased me mercilessly. "The lawyer makes you laugh," she said, smirking. "Be careful. Laughter is how widows and single mothers fall in love all over again." I told her she was imagining things. But that night, I caught myself replaying a joke Lance had made about contracts being like recipes. Follow the steps, or you end up with disaster instead of dinner. It was simple, but it had made me laugh so hard I forgot, for a second, how heavy my history was. The years that followed unfolded with a rhythm of progress. I finished my degree online, nights filled with textbooks and coffee. Elena promoted me from hostess to manager, then from manager to partner. My name began appearing discreetly on documents, proof of her trust, but also of her expectation that I carry the weight forward. There were moments of doubt. Once, after a long shift, I sat on the restaurant's back steps, watching Sage sleep in the booth beside me, his arms wrapped around a notebook full of equations. "I'm scared," I admitted when Elena found me. "What if I break everything you've given us?" She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then you rebuild. That is what families do." But the word family always caught in my throat. My parents had stripped it from me with clinical precision, leaving it raw and bitter. Elena gave it back, but I sometimes wondered if it would always feel like borrowed language. Sage never questioned it. To him, Elena was his grandmother, I was his anchor, and Lance, who by then visited often, was the man who brought warmth without demand. One Christmas, Sage announced at dinner, "We are not missing any pieces. We are the whole puzzle." Elena wept silently into her napkin, and Lance squeezed my hand under the table. Still, shadows lingered. Elena grew more meticulous about her safe, updating its contents like a ritual. "Someday," she told Lance and me, "these papers will matter more than my restaurants or my savings. They are proof against ghosts." I didn't fully understand, but I trusted her. She was a woman who had lost a daughter and rebuilt her heart around strangers. If she said the world would come knocking again, I believed her. Sage thrived, and with every step forward, the whisper of those ghosts grew louder in my imagination. The parents who had discarded me like waste, the boy who had blocked my number. What if they returned? Would I crumble? Would Sage resent me for keeping him apart from people who shared his blood? One night after Sage had fallen asleep, I asked Lance quietly, "What if they try to come back?" He looked at me with the calm of a man who built safety from paper. Then we remind them that choices leave trails, and some trails end at locked doors. Elena listened, said nothing, and the next day added another folder to her fireproof box. Years passed in the rhythm of progress. Studies, shifts, milestones. But beneath every achievement, I felt the hum of inevitability, like distant thunder. Success doesn't stay hidden. Eventually the world would notice Sage, and when it did, so would the people who once pretended we didn't exist. Elena sensed it too. On the eve of Sage's 16th birthday, she lingered at the window, staring out into the dark street. "They will come," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not for you, not for him, but for what he represents. Be ready." At the time, I thought she meant college recruiters, medical schools, opportunities that would flood in. But years later, when the headlines came and the past began clawing back, I realized she'd been warning me of something colder. That night, I kissed Sage's forehead and whispered, "We're ready." But my voice wavered, because deep down, I knew the ghosts weren't gone. They were waiting for the moment he became too bright to ignore. And Elena, wise, relentless, loving, was making sure that when they returned, we would not be defenseless. The headline hit like an earthquake. Prodigy surgeon named youngest department chief in state history. Sage stood in front of the new cardiac wing, surgical scrubs crisp, stethoscope looped around his neck like a medal he'd earned 1,000 times over. His photo was everywhere, in the paper, on the hospital website, across social feeds. Patients commented with gratitude. Colleagues praised his brilliance. Overnight, the boy who had once stitched up teddy bears became a man the world now claimed as its own. I should have felt only pride, and I did. But underneath, a tremor stirred. Elena's warning echoed. They will come. It took less than a week. The first package arrived at the hospital loading dock. A delivery man in a crisp uniform handed over a velvet case. Inside, a Rolex Submariner, gleaming, engraved with 2 initials, RH, for Robert Harrison. The note beneath it read, "It's in his blood." I stood frozen in the service corridor, the buzz of the fluorescent lights louder than my own pulse. Blood. The word they had used as both weapon and excuse. That night, Sage found me at the kitchen table, the watch hidden in a drawer. "Mom," he said, laying down a box of Mont Blanc pens, "someone keeps sending me things. Expensive things. Should I be worried?" "Yes," I said. "You should be cautious, and you should return them." He frowned, not in rebellion, but in quiet confusion. Why would anyone I don't know want to buy me? Because they never wanted me, I thought. Only the future I carried. The packages multiplied. First editions of medical texts, rare surgical instruments, even a check slipped into an envelope marked only, "From your grandparents." At Rossi's one evening, I noticed a couple seated too stiffly in the corner. Their menus lay untouched. I didn't have to see her face. My mother's emerald ring caught the candlelight. The the same one I used to sneak into her jewelry box to try on as a girl. I froze mid-step. "Virginia," she said before I could turn away, voice dripping with the practiced warmth of a politician caught off guard. "We need to talk about Sage." I steadied the tray in my hand. "You need to leave." But they didn't. They came back again, booking tables under fake names, watching me work. Each time I recognized them before they spoke, because their faces had aged like fruit left too long on the counter, Botox stretched thin, pride curdled into something desperate. The emails followed. Cold, professional. "Dear Ms. Whitmore, recent news has brought to our attention your son's remarkable achievements. As his grandparents, we feel it is time to reconnect. Signed not as Robert and Margaret, but as Harrison Industries." They weren't reaching out as family. They were petitioning as shareholders. One night, after another long shift, I found Elena waiting in the living room, her cane by her side, the fireproof box open on the coffee table. She slid a photocopy across to me, the document my parents had signed when they disowned me. "Keep this near," she said. "They will pretend memory is fragile, paper is not." But it wasn't just my parents circling. Shadows multiplied. A hospital PR producer reached out, polite but insistent. "There's a narrative opportunity here," he said. "A story of healing and reunion. America loves a comeback. Imagine the optics. The prodigy surgeon, reconciling with his estranged family." I laughed, sharp enough to cut glass. "This isn't television, it's our lives." "Exactly," he said, smiling. "That's what makes it powerful." I walked him to the door, but the words clung like smoke. Healing, reunion, comeback. Not because I wanted them, but because I knew my parents would. Later that week, a janitor at the hospital found me waiting for Sage to finish rounds. He'd seen me pacing and offered me a cup of coffee from his thermos. His name was Carl. He'd worked there 20 years. "Family drama?" he asked gently, like he already knew. I nodded. "They'll try to use his name," Carl said. "This place runs on reputations. But you remember this. Reputations fade. Character doesn't." He tipped his cap and went back to polishing the floor, a man who knew more about legacy than my parents ever did. That night I lay awake, Sage's childhood scattered in my memory, the teddy bear with stitched seams, the first time he read a chart faster than me, the look on his face when he asked why anyone would want to buy him. And I realized what terrified me wasn't that my parents wanted him now. It was that he might one day want them. The thought hollowed me, because children, no matter how brilliant, sometimes confuse curiosity for longing, and blood for truth. When I finally drifted to sleep, Elena's words whispered back through the dark. "Signatures outlive apologies." I prayed they would be enough. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. It happened on a Wednesday morning, just after dawn. Sage stopped at the corner cafe near the hospital, his scrubs still smelling faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. He ordered a black coffee and was waiting for his change when a woman stepped into his path. "You look just like your grandfather," she said, blocking the doorway with the confidence of someone rehearsed. He blinked, startled, fingers tightening around the paper cup. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Her lipstick was too bright, her coat too polished for early morning. But it wasn't the fashion that made Sage's skin crawl. It was the emerald ring catching light with every movement. "My mother." "I'm your grandmother, sweetheart. Your mother has kept us apart." She smiled as though unveiling a long-kept secret. "But blood can't be denied." Sage's instinct wasn't to believe or even to argue. He pulled out his phone and called me. "Mom," he said, his voice low but steady. "Some woman just ambushed me. Claims she's my grandmother. Do you want me to call security?" "Yes," I told him, "always." By the time I reached him, she was gone, leaving behind only the faint smell of her perfume, sharp, expensive, suffocating. That night, the phone rang again. A number I hadn't seen in 20 years, but somehow recognized. I let it go to voicemail. Then, against my better judgment, I pressed play. "Virginia, it's me," the voice rasped. "It's me," as if that had ever been enough. Owen, the boy who promised me forever, the man who blocked my number the moment I said the word pregnant. I answered the next call out of something between rage and curiosity. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat as stone. "I saw the news about Sage," he said quickly. "He's incredible, our son." My stomach twisted at the phrase. Now he's our son? When I was 17 and alone, he was my problem, my exile. Now that he's in headlines, he's suddenly yours. "That's not fair," Owen stammered. "I was 18. My parents threatened." "To what?" I cut him off. Disown you? Make you sleep in a park? I survived that. You didn't even try. Silence stretched on the line, thick and guilty. Then he whispered, I've lost everything. The startup failed. The marriage is gone. I'm bankrupt. I just want to know him. Convenient timing, I said. Virginia, please, he's my blood. The words landed like a curse. You blocked my number when blood meant stretch marks and fear, I hissed. Now that it means success, you remember biology. But his next sentence revealed the truth. Your parents contacted me. They think if I'm involved, you'll be more receptive. I almost dropped the phone. You're working with them? They're offering to help me financially if I can convince you. My hand trembled, then steadied. You're not just a coward. You're a mercenary. I hung up before he could reply. I called Lance immediately, my voice still shaking. They're coordinating, my parents and Owen. They're planning this together. Good, Lance said. Good, I nearly shouted. Conspiracy leaves footprints, he explained calmly. Calls, emails, documents. The more they coordinate, the more evidence they create. And Elena taught us one thing. Paper doesn't forget. The next morning, Owen's words became proof. He sent a long email about his so-called father's rights, CCing my parents at the bottom, as if to ensure collusion was undeniable. Hidden in his signature block was the line that made bile rise in my throat. Consultant, Harrison Industries, family relations. They hadn't just reached out to him, they'd hired him. That evening, as I tucked Sage into bed, I noticed him scrolling his phone with an expression too heavy for 20 years old. You okay? I asked. He hesitated. Mom, some man keeps viewing my profile. Owen Blake. Is he... I froze, then sat on the edge of his bed. Yes, I said finally. He's your biological father, and he's the man who abandoned us. Sage stared at the ceiling for a long time. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted you to grow without the weight of his absence. He turned toward me, his face calm but his knuckles white on the blanket. I don't need him. I never did. I kissed his forehead, my throat tight. You have Lance, you have Elena, you have me. But deep down I knew it wasn't over. Because men like Owen don't crawl back from shame without dragging someone else into the dirt. And my parents, they never forgave the world for forgetting them. Together, they had become something new. Not just ghosts of the past, but predators. And predators, when cornered, don't retreat. They strike. The hospital lobby was a cathedral of polished marble and controlled light, built to impress donors more than to comfort patients. That morning, its serenity fractured. My parents marched into the VIP wing like generals returning to territory they believed was theirs. My mother's pearls gleamed against her throat, her hair lacquered into submission. My father's voice carried across the atrium with the weight of money used to being obeyed. We are here to see our grandson, he announced, each syllable measured to carry. Dr. Whitmore, Chief of Cardiac Surgery. The receptionist blinked, uncertain. She glanced at the schedule, then at their faces. Dr. Whitmore is currently in surgery. We'll wait, my father cut her off, lowering himself into a leather chair with the finality of ownership. Security was called. I arrived moments later, breath short from running, Lance at my side. Mom, the receptionist whispered urgently, they say they're his grandparents. I looked at them. Their faces were older, lined not just with years, but with the strain of maintaining an empire built on image. My mother's eyes found mine and narrowed, as if she couldn't believe I had the audacity to keep existing outside her script. You need to leave, I told them. My father straightened. We are family. We have rights. Before I could respond, the OR doors opened. Sage emerged, still in scrubs, exhaustion painted on his face, his hands freshly scrubbed clean. He looked at me, then at the strangers with their expensive clothes and trembling entitlement. Are these the people? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, they are. Then I want them removed. His voice didn't waver. It carried the authority of someone used to deciding between life and death. He didn't even look at them again. Security escorted them out, but they didn't leave quietly. My mother wept into a monogrammed handkerchief. 20 years, she wailed, voice pitched for the phones already recording. We've been denied our only grandchild for 20 years. Her act might have fooled strangers, but I saw the calculation in the set of her jaw, the way she glanced at the cameras to ensure the performance landed. By evening, their strategy became clear. The local news ran a segment titled, Estranged Parents Plead for Reunion with Grandson. My mother's face filled the screen, tears perfectly balanced against flawless foundation. We were shocked, unprepared, she said, voice quivering just so. We made mistakes, but we've tried to make amends. And now our daughter punishes us by keeping our grandson from us. The comments flooded social media. Family is everything. Forgive them. Don't be cruel. For the first time in years, I felt like the world was tilting back in their favor. The hospital board noticed too. The next day, I was summoned to Dr. Morrison's office. He sat behind a mahogany desk, fiddling with his pen. Virginia, you understand the Harrisons have been generous donors. 12 million over the years. The optics? Optics? My voice cracked sharp. They abandoned me at 17, pregnant, alone. Do you call that a mistake? He shifted uncomfortably. I'm not condoning. I'm saying the pressure is mounting. Perhaps a supervised meeting. Would you meet with people who left you in the cold to die? I asked. He lowered his eyes. It's not my decision, but Sage's position, the hospital's reputation, it's complicated. Complicated. That was the word people used when cruelty came wrapped in money. At Rossi's that evening, even customers felt emboldened. Family is complicated, one said as I poured her wine, but forgiveness is divine, don't you think? I smiled without warmth and walked away. Later that night, Lance came home with a folder. He set it on the table between us, his expression grave but steady. He asked to see them, he said. My stomach dropped. Sage? Yes, he wants the truth in writing. The folder opened with a sigh of old paper. Inside lay the original disownment document, yellowed at the edges, but still sharp in its cruelty. Sage sat down across from us, his hands steady even as his knuckles whitened. He began to read. We, Robert and Margaret Harrison, hereby relinquish all parental rights and responsibilities to Virginia Whitmore and any children born or unborn. His voice was clinical, the cadence of a surgeon dictating notes, but the set of his jaw betrayed the impact. He paused halfway, looked up at me. They signed this while you were pregnant with me? Yes, I whispered. And this line, in perpetuity, it means forever. It means they cannot undo what they did, Lance confirmed. Sage closed the file gently, as if it were a patient's chart, fragile and final. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. They want to claim me now, he said softly, but they already signed me away. I reached for his hand. They never wanted you, only what you represent. For a long time, silence hung between us. Then Sage straightened, his eyes hard with a resolve I hadn't seen before. Then they'll get what they deserve, he said, and this time, I'll be the one holding the scalpel. The words chilled me, not because of their anger, but because of their certainty. My son, brilliant and kind, had just declared war. Bernardino's was the kind of restaurant designed to make even the wealthy sweat. White tablecloths starched into military precision, chandeliers dripping crystal like frozen tears, waiters whose silence carried judgment heavier than words. That's where my parents asked to meet. Of course they did. It was their natural habitat, rooms where reputation had a reserved seat and truth wasn't on the menu. Lance and I arrived first. He wore his lawyer's armor, navy suit, tie perfectly knotted, leather folder under his arm. I wore black, simple, and sharp, as if grief itself had chosen an outfit. The maitre d' guided us to a table at the center, too exposed for comfort. I understood instantly. My parents wanted an audience, even if it was only the hum of Springfield's elite dining in quiet astonishment. They appeared minutes later, my father in a charcoal suit that still fit too well, his gold watch flashing under the lights, my mother in pearls and vintage Chanel, every detail curated to whisper power. They greeted no one, yet expected every eye to follow them. Let's skip the pleasantries, my father said before the water arrived. He pushed a leather folder across the table. Inside is a contract. $10 million. 5 now, 5 later, all placed in trust for Sage. I didn't move. And in return, a public reconciliation, he said. 1 family photo, 1 press release. He joins the Harrison board when appropriate. The world sees what it wants. Legacy. My stomach twisted. Legacy. That word they'd hidden behind when they threw me out. Legacy mattered more than love, more than blood, more than their own daughter. You want to buy us? I said flatly. We want to invest in our grandson's future, my mother corrected smoothly. He is a Harrison. He should carry the name, benefit from it. I leaned forward. The name you erased when I was 17. The name you buried with your signatures. Her jaw tightened. We made mistakes, but blood is binding. You can't change that. Lance had been quiet, watching. Now he opened the folder they'd slid across. Inside, I saw the contract. Harrison Industries letterhead. Corporate seal. But there was something else. An addendum. Embossed. Already countersigned. Lance lifted it between two fingers. Interesting. You've already signed your non-disclosure clauses. My parents froze. You planned this not as a conversation, Lance said calmly, but as a transaction, one you assumed we would accept. My father's eyes narrowed. You've been monitoring us? No, Lance replied. You've been leaving a trail. Emails, contracts, consultants on payroll. He tapped the page. And redundancy. Lawyers love redundancy. It makes cases airtight. I excused myself to the restroom, my legs trembling, the room spinning with rage. In the mirror, I braced against the sink, breathing until my reflection steadied. My hand shook, then stilled. I realized this wasn't just about refusing their money. This was about refusing their script entirely. When I returned, I found my mother staring at me with something between pity and contempt. That boy deserves to know his real family, she said. He does, I answered. That's why he'll never know you. The waiter placed entrees none of us would touch. The contract lay between us, like a poisoned offering. You think you've won, my father said finally, standing. He tossed 3 crisp hundreds on the table as if the gesture still carried weight. But this offer won't stand forever. As they turned to leave, I whispered, not loud enough for the other diners, but enough for them. Neither will your legacy. Lance and I stayed behind, silent. The chandeliers above glittered coldly, as though mocking the theater we'd just endured. I looked at him. They won't stop. No, he agreed. But we don't need them to stop. We just need them to keep going. Every move they make builds our case stronger. And for the first time, I understood. This wasn't survival anymore. It was strategy. That night, as Sage returned from a grueling 16-hour shift, I told him everything. His face, pale with exhaustion, dark circles under his eyes, hardened in resolve. They want to make me a Harrison, he said bitterly, but I already am one. Yours. He looked at Lance, then at me. Tell me what we need to do. I'm ready. The boy who once stitched teddy bears with crooked sutures was gone. In his place stood a man holding his scalpel steady. My son. My ally. And from that night forward, it wasn't just defense. It was war. The plan began not with anger, but with ink. Elena had always said, if you want to trap the powerful, invite them to a party they can't refuse. Her words echoed as I sat at the dining table, 3 pearl-white invitations spread before me. Each envelope bore careful handwriting. My mother's name, my father's, and Owen's. My hand shook as I wrote, but I forced myself to keep the strokes steady. Formal documentation will be provided, I wrote. Please join us at the Springfield Memorial Gala to receive your inheritance from the Elena Rossi estate. For Owen, I added a different line. Your presence is requested regarding Sage's patrimony and your parental status. The bait was irresistible. Money, legacy, titles. They would believe they'd won before even stepping foot in the ballroom. Lance sealed the envelopes, his expression grim but certain. They'll come, he said. They have to, I whispered. Meanwhile, preparations for the gala unfolded with clinical precision. The Springfield Memorial Gala was the city's crown jewel, an evening of old money and new philanthropy, where chandeliers spilled light like liquid over crystal glasses and white orchids decorated every table. 500 guests, 6 news outlets, a stage built for revelations. And at the heart of it, Sage, tasked with delivering the keynote speech. He stood at the podium in our living room, practicing words that trembled with conviction. Family isn't about blood, he read aloud. It's about presence. It's about who shows up. He glanced at me. Too much? No, I said softly. It's exactly right. He practiced until his voice no longer wavered, until each sentence fell like a blade. Behind him, Elena's portrait watched in silence, the matriarch guiding us even from the grave. But it wasn't only speeches we prepared. Lance rehearsed evidence like a trial attorney, pacing the room, clicking through slides on his laptop, the 2004 disownment document, emails between my parents and Owen, the consulting contract. Each piece fitted together into a noose of their own making. Remember, Lance said, we don't attack first. We let them rise to speak, then we cut the rope. At night, when the house was quiet, I packed details the way others pack for war. Elena's brooch pinned to my dress, a talisman of strength. Sage's first teddy bear tucked into my bag, a reminder of why we fought. Even small things felt like shields: ink pens, tissues, paper folded with my grandmother's handwriting. You are not alone. Yet beneath the planning, fear thrummed. I woke often in the dark, imagining their faces twisted in outrage, their voices carrying lies across microphones. I imagined Owen, slick and desperate, playing victim. Worst of all, I imagined the crowd turning, believing them, not us. Lance would find me pacing, his hand warm on my shoulder. They'll underestimate us, he said. That's their pattern, and underestimation is fatal. One evening, Sage lingered at the NICU window after a long shift. Tiny infants lay in incubators, machines breathing for them, lights blinking steady as heartbeats. They're fragile, he whispered, and yet every day they fight to live. He glanced at me. That's us, isn't it? We've been fighting since before I was born. Tears stung my eyes. Yes, and you've been winning since day one. At Rossi's, I gathered the staff, our extended family foraged in kitchens and dining rooms, and told them what was coming. You may hear stories, lies, I warned. But remember this, Elena built this place on truth, and truth is what we carry. They nodded, some with tears, some with clenched fists. They had been witnesses to years of resilience. Now they would be witnesses to the reckoning. The night before the gala, I sat at Elena's desk, staring at the fireproof box she'd guarded so fiercely. I traced the edges, remembering her words. Signatures outlive apologies. Then I added a new note of my own and slipped it inside. We are ready. The morning of the gala, RSVPs came back. Yes from my father, yes from my mother, yes from Owen. All three responded within minutes. They think they've won, Lance said, scanning the confirmations. Good, I answered. The best defeats come when victory feels certain. The ballroom glittered, the orchids gleamed, the stage waited. 500 seats filled with eyes ready to witness a story of family, legacy, and healing. My parents believed it would be theirs to tell. But Elena had left us the script, and this time every light would shine on the truth. The Springfield Memorial Ballroom glittered like a palace of illusions. Chandeliers rained light over silk-covered tables, each centerpiece a bouquet of white orchids arranged with surgical precision. Waiters moved like shadows, balancing champagne flutes that sparkled with anticipation. 500 guests gathered in their finest, a sea of tuxedos and gowns, every face expectant, hungry for spectacle. At the very front, table 1, sat my parents, Robert and Margaret Harrison. They held court like royalty, displaced but not dethroned. My father in his Harvard tie, posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room as if calculating ownership. My mother in vintage Chanel, pearls gleaming like armor, her smile fixed in the practiced balance between martyrdom and pride. Beside them, Owen fidgeted in a rented tux that fit him poorly, his discomfort too loud to be hidden. The MC stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Sage Whitmore. My son walked onto the stage in scrubs. Not a tuxedo, not even a pressed suit. Scrubs, the uniform of a man who had saved lives that very morning. A ripple of murmurs swept the room. My mother's smile faltered. My father's jaw tightened. They hadn't anticipated this. Sage stood tall, voice steady. Good evening. I'm here tonight to speak about family. Not the family you're born into, but the family that shows up when you need them most. Gasps rustled through the crowd. My parents straightened in their chairs, assuming still, always, that he meant them. 20 years ago, Sage continued, a 17-year-old girl was thrown out of her home for being pregnant. She slept in a park. She ate from vending machines. She had nothing except the life growing inside her. The room stilled. My father's hand froze on his champagne glass. My mother's smile became a mask that cracked at the edges. Then a woman named Elena Rossi found her, Sage said, his voice thick with reverence. A widow with no obligation, no reason except love. Elena became her family. She became my grandmother. She gave my mother dignity, purpose, and shelter. She gave me life. On the giant LED screen behind him, Elena's portrait appeared, 20 feet tall, radiant, smiling as if alive. Guests whispered, eyes glistening. Everything I am, Sage said, I owe to two women. My mother, who sacrificed everything for me, and Elena, who proved that family is not defined by blood, but by presence. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling. At table 1, my parents no longer smiled. Sage lifted a hand, stilling the room. Tonight, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Elena Rossi Foundation for Teen Mothers. With an initial funding of $5 million, we will provide housing, childcare, education, and hope for young mothers abandoned by their families. The screen shifted again. Elena's face returned, this time speaking. A video she had recorded years before, her voice strong, despite the illness already inside her. "If you're watching this," she began, "then my grandson has become what I always knew he would be, a healer. But this message is not for him, it is for the Harrisons." The room collectively inhaled. "Yes," Elena continued, her eyes piercing through the camera as though addressing them across time. "I know exactly who you are. I know about the 10 minutes you gave Virginia to pack. The portrait you turned face down. The signatures you left on papers more cruel than any words." Gasps scattered across the ballroom. My mother gripped the tablecloth until her knuckles whitened. My father's face went pale. "You threw away a treasure," Elena said. "I found her. She became my daughter. Sage became my grandson. And you are nothing. Ghosts. Signatures on a paper that ensures you will never hurt them again." The screen froze on her face, eyes blazing with defiance. The crowd turned, 500 eyes now fixed on table 1. My mother shot to her feet. "We are his grandparents, his blood. You can't erase that." Sage's voice was calm, cutting through the chaos. "You're strangers who share DNA, that's all." "How dare you!" my father roared, rising, face purple with rage. "Mr. Mitchell," Sage said into the microphone, "would you please present the documents?" Lance rose from his seat, the folder in his hands like a holy text. He walked toward the stage with measured steps. "What you're about to see," he said to the crowd, "are the signatures Robert and Margaret Harrison placed 20 years ago." The screen lit again. The document appeared, magnified larger than life. October 15th, 2004. Every word sharp, every line undeniable. "We, Robert and Margaret Harrison, hereby relinquish all parental rights and responsibilities to Virginia Whitmore and any children born or unborn." The room erupted in whispers. The signatures at the bottom filled the screen. Bold, deliberate, undeniable. "This clause," Lance said, tapping the highlighted section, "extends in perpetuity, forever, irrevocable." They didn't just disown their daughter. They disowned every generation that would follow. "No," my mother cried. "We didn't know." "You," Lance interrupted, his voice razor-edged, "have a Harvard law degree. You knew exactly what you were signing." Gasps turned to outright condemnation. Guests muttered, some shaking their heads, others pulling out phones to record. And then, the ticking. Loud and insistent. A projection of a clock appeared behind Sage, hands frozen, at 8:04 p.m. Elena's voice, recorded years earlier, filled the room again. "They gave my daughter 10 minutes to leave her home. Tonight, I give them 10 minutes to leave this one. If you're still here at 8:15, restraining orders and criminal charges will follow. You cannot buy your way out of this. You cannot lie your way out. You can only leave." Lance checked his watch. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the countdown begins now." All eyes returned to table 1. My parents sat frozen, trapped in the light of truth they could no longer bend. Owen shifted uncomfortably, trying to sink into his ill-fitting tux, his eyes darting toward the exits. Around them the crowd had turned. 500 witnesses, cameras recording, the world watching. And for the first time in 20 years, power was no longer theirs. The fallout was faster and sharper than I could have imagined. Within 24 hours, footage from the gala went viral. Clips of my mother screaming about being the real family, countered by Elena's recorded words, circulated with captions like 10-minute parents and blood isn't love. By the next morning, the hashtag #Elena was right trended across platforms. At the hospital, Sage kept his focus, burying himself in surgeries, but even there, the whispers followed. Nurses shared the video in break rooms, patients' families asked for selfies, and a donor board member was overheard muttering, "The Harrisons are finished." And they were. By week's end, Harrison Industries' stock had plummeted 30%. Investors fled, board members panicked. An emergency meeting was called, and the outcome spread like wildfire. My father was voted out as CEO. The empire he'd sacrificed me for was slipping from his hands. Lance received an envelope from an anonymous contact within the company, internal memos showing that public trust had collapsed. One line seared itself into memory. Association with the Harrisons now presents reputational risk beyond repair. At church, the one where my father had once stood as an elder, they were asked not to return. Too many parishioners had seen the video. Too many whispers turned into open condemnation. Even the pastor's handshake vanished into thin air. My mother withdrew into silence. Friends stopped returning calls. The charity luncheons that once begged for her attendance suddenly rescheduled indefinitely. In place of her curated society photos came tabloid snapshots, her leaving grocery stores in oversized sunglasses, my father trailing behind, jaw clenched, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. And Owen? His downfall was uglier. His bankruptcy had already gutted him, but the emails exposed at the gala became ammunition. His ex-wife subpoenaed them, in her case, for unpaid child support. Federal investigators circled when they found evidence of concealed assets. Lance showed me the filings quietly one night. He's looking at 3 years minimum, maybe more. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity. Just the kind of hollow clarity that comes when a story has ended exactly the way it was always going to. But Sage, he struggled more. I don't understand, he admitted one night, slumped on the couch after a 16-hour shift. How can people still sympathize with them? I've seen comments online, strangers saying you should forgive, that I should forgive. Because it's easier, I told him gently. Forgiveness makes people feel good. It tidies up the mess. But what they want isn't forgiveness. It's erasure. They want us to act like it never happened. He rubbed his temples, silent for a long moment. I don't hate them, he said finally. But I don't want them near me either. Is that wrong? No, I said, pulling him into a hug. That's survival. That night, I sat alone in the quiet and opened Elena's video again. I had watched it a dozen times, but somehow her eyes always felt newly alive, her voice cutting through the loneliness. You have everything, she had said. The restaurants, the investments, this house. 15 million, all protected in trust. They can't touch it. They can't touch you. Be free. I wept for the first time in months. Not out of fear, but out of release. Elena's foresight had shielded us. Her love had built walls around us. And now those walls held. Still, ghosts don't vanish without a trace. One afternoon in the courthouse corridor, as hearings were scheduled for restraining orders to become permanent, I passed Owen. His shoulders were hunched, his suit wrinkled, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. He stopped when he saw me. Virginia, he said softly, eyes hollow. Was there a moment, just one, where I could have done right? I looked at him for a long time, at the boy I once loved, the man who once abandoned me, the wreck of a human standing now. Every moment, I said quietly, every moment you chose not to. He dropped his gaze and I walked away. That evening, as the house settled into silence, I lit a candle by Elena's portrait. Sage was asleep. Lance was working late. It was just me and her. We did it, I whispered. You were right. Paper doesn't forget. Neither does love. The flame flickered, and for a moment, I swore I felt her hand on my shoulder. Outside, Springfield buzzed with scandal, headlines, and collapsing legacies. But in that moment, in the warmth of a single flame, I understood what she had been preparing me for all along. Freedom doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives softly, like breath returning after years of holding it in. And finally, I could breathe. 3 weeks later, life looked startlingly ordinary, and that was its own miracle. Sunday dinners had become ritual. A roast in the oven, wine from Elena's cellar, laughter rolling through the same dining room where once she sat with us, teaching Sage how to hold cutlery with grace. Now he carved the roast himself, precise as surgery, joking about incisions, while Lance teased him about bedside manner. So I saved 3 lives this week, Sage said casually, pouring gravy as if he were discussing the weather. Show off, Lance muttered, raising his glass. The youngest was 4 months old, Sage continued, softer now. Her mother was 17, reminded me of someone. His eyes found mine. I felt my throat tighten. What happened? She'd been living in her car, he said, but not anymore. I told her about the Rossi Foundation. Intake starts tomorrow. Silence hung for a moment, full and reverent. Then Lance smiled. Elena would be proud. The Rossi Foundation had become more than a name. That evening at the gala had raised not just money, but momentum. Within weeks, applications flooded in. Young mothers desperate for shelter, second chances, dignity. The first building was already underway. the Elena Rossi Center for Young Mothers, with housing for 20 families, on-site childcare, scholarships for education, even job training in our restaurants. Every brick we laid felt like a vow to the 17-year-old I used to be, huddled under a park gazebo with nothing but fear in my pockets. But family, Elena always said, wasn't only obligation, it was joy, too. That's why, one evening over dinner, I looked across the table at Lance and decided I was done waiting. "You're supposed to let me propose," he said, when I pulled out the ring I'd bought, nerves burning hotter than the candles. "Elena always said speak up for what you want," I told him. "So, Lance Mitchell, will you marry me?" Sage nearly dropped the carving knife. "Mom, over pot roast? Really?" Lance laughed until his eyes watered. Then he slipped the ring on his finger and said, "Yes, absolutely, yes." We toasted with Elena's Waterford crystal. In the candlelight, her portrait on the wall seemed to smile. The ghosts of the Harrisons lingered at the edges of the city, but they no longer haunted me. News outlets reported their downfall in ruthless detail. The mansion listed far below market value, their reputation exiled from church pews and corporate halls alike. Owen's trial loomed, his name now synonymous with fraud. They had become strangers not just to us, but to everyone they once courted. One envelope arrived in the mail, my mother's handwriting. I stared at it for hours before opening. Inside was no apology, only rationalizations dressed as concern. We were young, we were frightened, we thought it best. Blood is thicker than shame. I didn't reply. But I did something unexpected. I arranged for a month's worth of groceries to be delivered to my aunt's address, where I knew they were staying. Not out of forgiveness, not out of obligation, out of choice, because mercy is strongest when it costs you nothing. Then I closed the door on the past. On Sage's next day off, he invited me to watch him operate. I stood in the observation gallery as he performed a delicate pediatric heart surgery. His hands moved with a confidence that made me ache with pride. When it was over, he didn't walk out to applause. He walked a trembling young mother to the Rossi Center intake desk, carrying her baby carrier himself. I saw myself in her, 17, scared, alone, except now, she wasn't. Back home, Sage dropped his keys in the dish by the door, like he always did, and smiled. "You know," he said, "we're not missing any pieces. We're the whole puzzle." And he was right. That night, I placed fresh orchids beneath Elena's portrait, replacing the wilted ones. I turned off the television. It only offered shadows of scandals we no longer lived in, and chose instead to sit with her face watching over us. This was family, not perfect, not traditional, but chosen, permanent. And somewhere in a guest house in Arizona, two people I once called parents were learning what I had always known. Some choices can never be undone, but better choices, those can be made every single day.